Hey everyone, it's Mark from counsellingsupervision.com.au. I did a group supervision session last Friday and we spoke about case notes and note taking. So I thought I'd do a little summary video of that one. This will, I don't know, I always guess it wrong, which probably will take about 10 minutes, this video, maybe 10, 15, just to summarize some of the highlights or the things that we discussed. And we discussed case scenarios as well, but that's beside the point. I discussed the fact that in the weird country of counseling, we actually don't have to keep notes. That's one of the things I'd like to remind you of first. And yes, don't jump down my throat straight away. I know that note taking is important, and probably for other industries it's different. But for counselors, I looked at the ACA and PACFA codes and all the regulations that might be out there, and nowhere does it say in no uncertain terms that we must keep notes. Therefore, we don't really have to. Now, you'd be quite not so smart if you didn't keep any case notes. I would highly suggest you do. But as a principle matter, I think as a lawyer, it's always good to think in those types of principles. It's like you don't have to. If you have an elephant's memory and you think that for all the clients that you work with, you could just keep track of what they've discussed by going back to your memory or by other things, maybe some scribbles or pictures or whatever you've got that remind you of that session, then you can do that. There's no need to keep notes. Again, for my brain, that doesn't work. I definitely need my notes to keep track of what I've been discussing with clients. And I find it handy, especially if I don't see people for half a year to a year. And it's a good idea just to have the notes ready there. But you don't have to, so keep that in mind. Now, what would be best practices for client note taking? Well, let's go for why do you need them in the first place? Well, it's that idea of having client information in there. It's there to jog your memory. It could be depending on who you work with and who you work for or what you work for. It could be an ethical or legal or contractual requirement to keep notes. But mainly it's just to keep track of what the client presented with, the interventions that you applied, the progress that the client is making, measurables that you and the client came up with of improvement, for instance, or what they would like to see change. So it's good to keep track of those, especially if you work with people for a longer period, then to be able to look back and say, hey, yeah, you discussed this in the beginning, that wasn't going so well, and we've set some goals here of how you would like to, where would you like to get? And look at what we've achieved already. So it's a really good idea to keep those notes in there. Make sure that you have informed consent because the client is still, well, not in control, but they still have a fair say. So if they don't want certain things to be written down, then make sure you don't. Or if they want you to leave it out of the notes or whatever it is that they want, keep that in mind as well. So you need to have informed consent and let them know that you'll be taking notes. Face-to-face kind of easy because they can probably see you write. But if you work with people online, they might not be aware of the fact that you're either typing away or you're taking some notes. So keep that in mind as well. And cultural sensitivity when note taking is important to make sure that you stay on track with what's accepted within certain cultures and whether these people enjoy it or not, or whether they are used to this or not. Now, I'm looking at a couple of things I want to make sure I discuss as well. Who owns the notes? Well, that depends. Generally, if it's in your private practice and you talk to clients, then you are the owner of the notes. So they're yours and it's not a big issue and they're yours. But for instance, if you work for an EAP company, an employee assistance program provider, you can pretty much bet your bottom dollar that somewhere in the contractual obligations, it'll say that the EAP company is the owner of the notes. So as soon as you either upload notes into their system or you type notes into their system, they become their notes. And even your handwritten ones, which you might keep at home under lock and key, technically they are owned by the EAP company. And keep that in mind because if they want it for whatever purpose, hopefully clients or you have a base it's on subpoena, then you are the ones that will have to hand them over because they're no longer yours anymore. And you can't hide behind the fact that you say, well, I've got them here, they're mine. No, they're not because you said you put your signature underneath the fact that they had become the EAP provider's notes. Confidentiality, that's another one to keep in mind. Everything is confidential. But there have been exceptions, and I ran a supervision session on that one as well, where confidentiality is no longer the thing to hide behind in a way. And that could be because of all the exceptions to confidentiality, but also, for instance, in family matters, and there's been a case about that, where the interest of the child or the child's interests dictate that certain information cannot be held back from courts. In this case, they are entitled to know. So confidentiality goes quite far, but not all the way. What do you put in your notes? Well, obviously, it's client information. If it's a first session, their presentation, what they came for, what they would like to get out of the sessions, psychosocial history, biopsychosocial history, whatever it is, previous diagnoses, medications, all that sort of stuff, the general information that you put in there. And what else do you put in there? Well, topics discussed, interventions used, homework discussed or set, or whatever you with the client have discussed that they would do in between sessions. And if it's a second, third, or beyond session, what would you put in there? Well, progress since last session, and then interventions used in this session, etc., etc. If you use outcome rating scales or session rating scales, then you can put the results of that in your notes as well. The ORS and the SRS, really handy to do. So it becomes a nice and complete file of what you and the client have been through over time. I'm looking at a couple of things I want to cover off. No, that's all done. So got all that sorted. Now, what about ways of storage? Just to keep it simple, if you write, like I'm an old-fashioned guy, so I still write my notes on paper, then make sure they're under lock and key and put away safely. That's pretty much it. Now, more and more people are going to online notes, either because the EAP company or the organization that you work for wants you to do that. Then, as part of your ethical obligations, you have to make sure that those notes are safe, that they're stored securely online, and it's not all your responsibility, but you definitely have a responsibility in there. That, for instance, if there's cloud storage, because you might use your own or your employers or your organizations, that cloud storage is secure and not open to breaches, because it's still your ethical obligation to look at client's confidentiality and the confidentiality of the notes you write. So things like encryption, authentication, privacy rights of the website that are being things are being stored, what countries are being stored in, etc., etc. You'll have to look at that too. You can't control all of that, but you want to make sure that it's as safe as possible. What else is there? Confidential of clients' notes. I'm just making sure I go through this. Yeah, the type of notes. How do you write notes? Well, there's a few accepted formats. SOAP is the easiest one, which pretty much stands for subjective. So you write down what you observed. Objective, you write down what got taken in, the information that you got. Then there's the assessment phase, and then there's the planning phase. Now, there's other ones, all with beautiful acronyms or abbreviations, DAP and BURP and whatever else. It actually really doesn't matter, as long as you can come up with a format, maybe down one online, where at least there's good old objective information in there, things like data, medical assessments, etc. But you're more than welcome to put your subjective notes in there as well, what you observed during session, and obviously what the goals, the plans are between you and the client. Make sure all that stuff is in there. Now, I have a tendency to sometimes in the sideline or through my notes write things that I find important, and they can be quite personal. So be careful with those ones, because if your notes ever get subpoenaed, you might run the risk that stuff comes across as well. Now, you can redact that out if you go, and that's totally irrelevant. You can either black it off or make a copy and make sure that that's black. Or if you have handwritten notes with lots of shorthand and completely illegible things that you're the only one who can read that, maybe type it up in a neat format and then hand those ones in. The Puritans will probably say, well, don't you have to hand in your handwritten notes as well? As an ex-lawyer, I would say, yeah, technically, but come and get me. Just prove the fact that I actually have handwritten notes outside what I've sent you. So I think in practice, that won't be too big an issue, as long as the person or the institution that wants the notes with the client's consent or through subpoena, has something where sessions are made clear or what was discussed. For instance, work cover. I work with work cover in Queensland. They will often ask for a standard report. As long as that standard report is in their files, they will never ask for any handwritten stuff. That's all they need, really. And that is enough. Now, what else is there? Well, that's it, really. So make sure that from that client safety, client confidentiality point of view, that you don't write stuff in notes that is highly subjective or really confusing. So keep client confidentiality in mind. But with the SOAP stuff as well, make sure that you're objective enough. Don't start writing things like, oh, the client was nervous. That doesn't mean anything. What does nervous mean? Or the client wanted to feel better, or said that they wanted to feel better, or I saw that the client was doing better. All those things don't mean much. Write what you observe. So if the client was sweating, was shaking, and couldn't get words out properly, on that basis, I assume that the client was nervous. Then at least you're putting your personal opinion in, but it's based on facts. If you said that the client wanted to feel better or the client was doing better, well, what signs were there for you to say that the client was doing better? And make sure to put those ones in. Now, there's all sorts of really interesting things about notes. I think the most important thing that I've always learned is that I don't have to keep them. And if I keep them, they're generally mine, unless I've signed my life away with an EAP company or another contractor that says, nope, the notes are no longer yours. And that generally confidentiality rules. So as long as you lock your notes up or have them safely stored online, very limited chance that they get subpoenaed. But it depends a little bit on what area of counselling you work in. If you work a lot with kids, young kids, in custody cases or in divorce cases, then the chances obviously are higher. If you, like me, work in private practice, not working with kids and doing a lot of EAP work, yes, my notes have been subpoenaed a number of times by not by the EAP company, but through a request from the EAP company because they were either subpoenaed or the client actually themselves had requested access to the notes, and then you'll just have to give it to them. So that's their right. So as long as there's client's consent, it's all okay. So I think for us, when you look at it at a real practical level, like where do I store them? Are they secure? What do I put in them? And do I follow a particular format? Who owns them? And what happens if I lose track of my notes? So whatever is in there, as long as that's objective enough for everyone to be read and there's no misunderstandings or confusions about that one, you should be good. So I hope that makes sense. Again, this is like eagle's eye perspective, really quick. There's much more to say about that one, but that was kind of the context of our discussion last Friday on notes. So hope that was useful for you too. If you got questions about that, please let me know. Happy to answer them. If you want to have some supervision about that one, well, you know where to find me: Facebook, LinkedIn, send me an email, whichever way you want to do it. And yeah, we'll keep talking. I hope to speak soon.